All right, thank you very much. Our last speaker for this session before we break for lunch is Kentaro Toyama. And Kentaro's kind of been a remote member of the family for TIR. He's hosted several of our students as interns at Microsoft Research in Bangalore, where he pretty much runs the ICTD work. And I think he would agree that we helped him out, particularly the late Richard Newton was one of the people working on the Microsoft Technology Advisory Board that got Microsoft to believe that they should be funding the kind of lab that he now runs. So it's been great working with him, and because he's worked with us for so long, he has about as many co-authors as my students as I do. And because he's such a great host to us, we felt we ought to let him give a pretty broad perspective on what he thinks is the way to work with us. Kentaro.
Thanks, Eric. I was at the first workshop that all of you held in 2004, and I really want to say that that workshop, just even in that early stage when a lot of you were just beginning your projects, it was incredibly influential in the way that we set up our group in Bangalore. And it's great to be here, I guess, towards the end of the funding, but hopefully not the end of all the programs. So I'm technically in the partnership slot, and actually it worked out well because there are a couple things that I wanted to talk about to this audience which fit under that paradigm. So I'm going to first, for people who are not familiar, I'm the Assistant Director of Microsoft Research India. We're in Bangalore. We've been there for a little over 3 years now. We were established in 2005, January, so it was literally just a few months after that first TIR workshop. The lab overall is a general purpose computer science research lab, but one of the groups which I run is called Technology for Emerging Markets, and the theme of that group is very similar to TIR. So these are some of the projects that we've have more or less run their course, at least as research projects. Some of them are still going on in the sense of trying to get greater impact. Some of these projects, like Multipoint and the SMS server that was part of WAR now Unwired, have gone on to become partially or supported products at Microsoft. Some of these projects are still going on and trying to increase their scaled impact through other means, whether through NGOs or with governments. And then some of these things have become papers that are becoming more and more circulated, especially among people who are interested in things like telecenters. I want to briefly mention some of the projects that we're doing right now, and I'll talk about, let me pick 3. So Kelsa Plus is a project that we've actually been running for some time. It's been running for about 18 months. And with all of our emphasis on trying to find poor communities, whether they're in rural areas or in urban slums, we felt that there was a poor community right under our noses in our lab, in our office, that we were not addressing. And that was they were the people who are our service staff. So they do house cleaning, security, drivers, and so on and so forth. And so what we did was we basically placed a PC in the basement, which is where many of them often hang out during the day when they're not working, that is fully connected to the internet, and it's very similar to the Hole in the Wall project, where we really initially to see what they would do with it, what they would really find interesting. And then since then, we've begun to actually introduce different kinds of software, whether it's English as a second language software or digital literacy and so forth. And at some point, hopefully you'll have a chance to hear a little bit about the results. They're actually quite interesting in that basically we've had consistent usage of that PC for about 10 hours a day on average for the last 18 months. And the usage has evolved. Initially, it was very varied and experimental, but over time, it's become more and more entertainment focused, whether it's videos or music. But also, a lot of people have actually learned how to do email, and in India, Orkut is one of the social networking sites that's very popular, and people are actually using Orkut. Digital Green is one of our projects that we are very proud of. This is a project that uses video for agriculture extension. And Revi earlier had a question about, why do people get so excited about computers and so on. This is a project where we actually didn't do that much new with technology at all, but the research was really in how to set up a larger organizational system that used digital video. I would say the work that we did is one of the, I'm very happy with it because I think it does a great job of showing the potential impact of very rigorously done design as well as research. So Ricken, who did that project, spent maybe 6 months in the field, effectively living in rural Karnataka. He's picked up Kannada to a point where he can speak with the local residents. He spent days and days and days really trying to come up with an interesting system. And then when we felt that it was doing much better than the original system for agriculture extension, we then went through a year-long comparative test where we had control villages as well as intervention villages. And what we found is that the system as planned, including all the cost of the technology, is 10 times as cost effective as the earlier system for classical agriculture extension, which means that whatever money you're spending on agriculture extension, this is a better way to go. And then the final project is something that we've just recently started investigating, although it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and that's called featherweight multimedia. And what featherweight multimedia are combinations of paper for visuals and then any kind of cheap electronics for audio. So this is I'm going to do a quick demo. This is a greeting card, audio greeting card made by a company called SEMA. And basically it allows you to record little bits of audio. So there's little photographs here of a process for growing azolla, which is from a video from Digital Green. And let me see if I can. And you press the button, and it plays some audio. And the great thing about this is that although these things retail for $10 online, it turns out, I've spoken to the woman who runs this company, they can make these things for 50 cents or less. Right? So it's a tremendous, I think it has a lot of tremendous potential in terms of delivering something like a multimedia experience to audiences that are often not either able to afford PCs or understand the full complexity of computers, or even mobile phones for that matter. So those are some of our projects. Let me see here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnerships with NGOs. Almost all the work that we do has been in partnership with one NGO or another. We do actually a lot of our pilot projects with smaller NGOs. And I'll talk a little bit about why, but you can see a list of some of the groups that we work with as well as which projects they were associated with. Most of these groups we're still in very good touch with today. Some of them are continuing to run the projects that we started with them. Others we actually declined to do a particular project because we felt that the technology wouldn't actually have the impact that we were hoping for. And then we also have a number of partnerships with very large NGOs. And one thing that we're finding is that they are very different in character. And if I were to highlight, I would say the pros of some of the large NGOs is that they're very well funded, they're well organized, they're very focused on scale, all very good things. And but I often find that whether it's individual personality or a culture of a particular country, that the strengths of a culture often end up being the weaknesses if taken to certain extremes. And so in the case of large NGOs, we find that they're often pushy, they're very process intensive. In fact, we've been trying a proposal in and it's I think Ricken has now gone through 30 iterations, each of which take literally several days just to do. And they're also very picky about projects because they're really looking for scale. So the question is always, okay, have you guys already proven that it works completely? And if we scale it to 1 million villages, will it really have the impact that we want? Interestingly, the positive side of these cons are exactly what small NGOs happen to be very good at. So we find on the whole, and these are generalizations, but on the whole, the smaller NGOs tend to be very appreciative that somebody is paying any attention to them. They're also very flexible because a lot of the projects they're running are kind of off the cuff, and they're very happy to try new things and so on and so forth. They're very open about projects, especially the ones that have various ideas that they want to get engaged with technology and so forth, are very open to trying lots of different things. So they're very good for experimentation. But of course, these things also result in negatives on the other side. And it's interesting how those negatives correspond to the strengths of the large NGOs. So my current theory, although this doesn't apply across the board, is that maybe it's a good idea to partner with small NGOs for pilots, and then once you've proven the model, to then start engaging with larger NGOs for scale. And that's kind of the model that we're using for Digital Green. Next I'll talk about partnerships with academia, and I'm going to focus specifically on UC Berkeley because that partnership has gone so particularly well. So we do a number of different things with universities, and they're listed here. I would say some of the more significant things like co-organizing conferences, and Eric mentioned earlier that we started ICTD here in conjunction with UC Berkeley and TIER. Some of the other things that we do are little bits of research funding. Most of this activity is happening with Indian universities, but it also happens to a certain extent elsewhere. And then again in India, there are certain times there's a lot of conversation about what's the right way to take research in the country, and we're engaged in a lot of those conversations. But I would say the most impactful method of collaboration is through research interns. So this is where a student from a university actually comes and spends some time in our office. And you can see some of the statistics of our internship program so far. We've had 50 plus interns just in this group over the last 4 years. And again, because of our very strong ties to UC Berkeley, 7 of those out of the 50 have been affiliated with UC Berkeley. I just want to show you what happens with these interns. So some of these people start off at MSR India and end up at UC Berkeley. And in some cases, we have people who started off at UC Berkeley who come and do internships and then go back. One thing I keep hearing is that we are losing our best people to UC Berkeley. I prefer to think of it as we're getting rid of the riffraff. And then, of course, the person who everybody knows here, who is not listed, but who is has come and gone many, many times, is Joji. And I have to say, it's been fantastic to have every one of those people in our lab. And it's not just their own individual energy and everything, but it's really helped connect us with UC Berkeley and the activities here. And I think there's quite a bit of kind of cross-pollination of ideas that happens. None of it is very formal. In fact, I don't think Eric and I have ever actually sat on a conference call that was really, that's been scheduled on a regular basis, but nevertheless, we are in reasonable touch through a lot of the students. So just to summarize, we're continuing to do new projects. We're definitely working with NGOs all across the board. And that, I would say that, I think there's a lot of value in actually trying to find small NGOs that have a very clear idea of what they're interested in doing, but are still also looking for partnerships. And then finally, I'd like to encourage more brain circulation. So I encourage anybody who's interested in internships in India. One thing that I think we do that's really nice is we provide a fairly safe, comfortable home base, so then you can go out and spend as much time in the field and then come back and still have a good shower. Thank you.
I'm here. Seriously, I was a little surprised and happily surprised to see that there were 4% African, students in your internships. So what is really missing most of the time in all these projects, and this question is really open to everybody, is the lack of African intellectual from Africa collaborating. Why we don't see most of the time people from universities in Africa in all these projects? What is the causes? I'm trying to think about it, but I don't know what prevents us from collaborating with those people. And if you guys have answers, I will be happy to.
I think, frankly, I think all of us are very interested in collaborating with African universities. The simple fact is actually, interestingly enough, a lot of the best students from Africa are not anymore in Africa. And so when you go there, you don't find the best and brightest of the students in that country. They're somewhere else. And so, in our case, I happen to have a personal tie with Ashesi University in Ghana. And so I go back there every year and try to see if we can work with. But I think all of us are very interested in engaging more with universities in Africa as well as students in Africa. And so to the extent that you can help that pipeline, I think we're more than open to that. You want to add anything, Eric?
Thanks for your talk. So my question is, has Microsoft productized any of these TEM projects? If yes, what has the experience been, and if not, why?
Yes, so let me see here. Two of our projects are now either have already been released as products or they are in the process of doing so. So Multipoint, which is one of our first projects where we basically wrote a middle layer that allowed multiple mice to interact with a PC with a separate cursor on screen. That is now a formal SDK that you can download free from the website. And actually, the company is now putting a little bit more marketing muscle behind it so that third-party educational content developers will write content for it. And then the other one is the SMS Server Toolkit, which was what was used in Wire Not Wired. And that is a project where basically it allows any PC to end up becoming a kind of server for text messaging-based interaction. And that project we actually presented to Ray Ozzie, who's currently our chief software architect. And he was already excited about SMS and text messaging, but he felt that this opened up a new avenue for possibility for Microsoft. Microsoft's story up until around 6 months ago has been that Windows mobile phones are the way to go, and that SMS is going to die off, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's quite clear that that's not happening. So.
The projects that are not being productized, are you releasing them under an open source license so they can flourish?
So what our interest is in seeing impact through whatever means. So for anything that we don't see bottom line value to the company, we try to see if there's some other way that we can have that impact. So Digital Green is a project where, again, there's very minimal technology. All you really need is a PC and a video editing tool. What the intellectual property, if you can call it that, is really how do you run this system out there. And what we're hoping to do is we are in the process right now of spinning off a nonprofit. Ricken, who's the lead researcher on the project, is actually going to quit the company to head that, and we've been doing everything we can to support it so that the nonprofit will be able to get funding to effectively teach techniques to other NGOs as it goes forward. So we're interested in having impact wherever we can. One thing I would say about this area for Microsoft is that, despite CK Prahalad, it's really not an area where we're going to make a lot of money. And so it's I think we've gradually convinced the company over time that it's futile to think of this as a revenue generating area, but it still nevertheless is an area where I think it has secondary benefit to the company. And so as long as we can have the impact, the goal is to maximize that.
Since we're wrapping up a session on partnerships and sustainability, I'm assuming there's a relationship between the two. And I'm wondering, the keynote speaker this morning said, if you're asking the sustainability question, then you have the wrong business model. I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on what makes projects sustainable, and do you have any examples of projects that have sustained?
That's a great question. So I actually think that sustainability is like the question of how do I establish a successful business? Meaning the word is totally meaningless because that's the whole problem. The whole problem is getting a project to work forever and ever and to have to maximum impact. And just like every business needs to figure that out on its own, I think every project needs to figure that out on its own. And I would say there's no single model. Some people believe you have to start a for-profit company. I don't necessarily think that, although I think that's one way to go. In some cases, some of our projects are, more or less sustaining because there is an NGO that believes in the project and that has continued to do it. In some cases, we try to convince governments to take up something that works. In our case, we have the fortune of being able to influence Microsoft quite strongly, and so in some of the projects, it'll sustain through those means. So I think it's sustainability is a challenge that you need to address every time. There's no simple answer. There's no formula, and it's important to focus on it. But I don't personally find any value in calling it out as a separate problem.